This decision by the government to ban the militia, it's not a law yet, but it is a fairly bold signal from the government. Can this government deliver on this promise, translate that into a law, and how do you see it from the outside as a potential investor into Libya?
It's a very welcome development. Obviously, it's quite impressive that the new prime minister, having hardly formed his cabinet, decided to make among his first big decisions the most difficult decision, which is the decision to get rid of the armed militias that have essentially turned Libya into a bit of a free-for-all. And that's something that, was bound to happen. The question was when and how. And now the decision has been made. Next would be to turn this decision into policy, because the intention has been there all along and they've attempted this in various ways. And after that, to turn it into law. But it's admirable that he's attempted this among his very first set of decisions.
It's interesting. You drew a comparison in your report with Iraq and Libya. Now, it's been a very bumpy road back for Iraq. The investment's starting to come in. It's much bigger in terms of population than Libya. But what are the lessons we can learn from the Iraq experience, in your view, in terms of rebooting the Libyan economy?
That's an important question, John. I remember covering Iraq back in 2005. This was close to 8 years ago now. And those of us covering Iraq in 2005, I was in the city at the time, here in London, were at pains to show how there could be light at the end of the tunnel. I, of course, felt there would be light at the end of the tunnel, having seen Lebanon for 17 years prior in complete chaos. And now Libya is in the same situation, only, I think, simpler than the situation in Iraq, because Libya doesn't have to deal with the multi-sectarian component that Iraq struggled with for a long time and in a way still struggles with. But this is an economy that's very, very well endowed with oil and gas resources. And, eventually, through the short-term volatility, overnight almost, we'll see the emergence of an economy that's pumping a lot of oil and producing a lot of liquidity, and where a new middle class is being created and where people have better things to do than to fight each other. This is what we're starting to see in Iraq now, minus, again, the political sectarian dimension that is specific to Iraq and that doesn't exist in Libya. So that leaves us very optimistic with respect to Libya in the medium to long term. But the short term is difficult.
Yeah, and in fact, you have the tribal background, which in Libya makes it quite difficult to govern, no doubt. You brought up the idea of oil production and getting it up to pre-war levels, which is 1.6 million barrels. It's producing about 1.4 million barrels right now. The latest proven reserves has it at 47 billion barrels. They'd like to get it close to 2 million by 2015. Are the oil producers confident enough to go back in? Can they hit this sort of target, in your view, in a short span of time?
Whether they hit the target or not is a function of how easily the place stabilizes. But what we do know from having observed other countries like Iraq and Nigeria and others is that the oil sector is relatively immune from the day-to-day civil strife that one observes in these sort of post-war conflict situations. And so it's very likely that the oil sector will get there. Just to go back to the earlier point, the multi-tribal system in Libya is not as complex as what we found in Iraq with the multi-ethnic system at the end of the war in Iraq. So I'm much more optimistic with respect to Libya than I was with respect to Iraq. I suspect Libya will take less time to stabilize, and the oil sector will remain relatively immune and will very likely meet the targets that the government has.
Florence, very quickly, before the Gaddafi regime was toppled, they tried to pass a foreign investment law. That's been stalled. Is this a priority, in your view, beyond oil, to get this law onto the books so it opens up infrastructure investment?
Yes, it's very much of a priority. First and foremost for Libyan citizens who fought hard to liberate their country. Libya has a deficit of about $200 billion in infrastructure requirements, starting from roads and bridges to schools and hospitals and all of that. There's a massive demand for infrastructure in Libya, and precisely the problem today is that with all the bad headlines being created because of arms remaining rampant in the economy, foreign investors aren't rushing back in. They'd like to. Foreign investors are, looking to invest in Libya and establish JVs in Libya, etc. But it's not so straightforward to do that. So there are two dimensions there that are going to be necessary. First, security, and second, a more friendly foreign investor regime, a new commercial law, a revamped foreign direct investment regime. All of that, I suspect, is the next set of priorities that the government is going to get to, because that, in fact, is what creates jobs. As we know, having oil production capacity back to where they'd like it to be and further isn't what's going to create jobs day to day for the average Libyan. It's the small and medium enterprises that are going to create jobs the most rapidly, and it's a priority to get an investment regime that's friendly to all of that.